Okay, well, welcome back to our four-part series on healing the wounded inner child. And today we are going to be talking about the second part of this segment or this live stream series, Inner Child Healing with Partswork. And so the way this works is I'm going to give a little content delivery, and then once we complete that piece, I'm going to take some time to answer some questions. So feel free to type your name and where you're coming from in the comments or in the chat box there. And also ask your questions as we go along. And I'm going to make some time to answer some of those when we come to the end of our segment here today. So just to dive right in, if you've been in the world of self-help and personal development for a while, then you've probably encountered the concept of healing the inner child. And if you struggled in relationships with insecure or unhealthy dynamics, from addiction to complicated grief to codependency and so on, then it's likely you have an inner child pulling the strings in your unconscious mind and energy body. And so John Bradshaw really popularized the idea of the wounded inner child, which is basically the concept that when we grow up in dysfunctional environments, a bit of your mental, physical, and emotional energy gets stuck, split off, or arrested at that time in life. And so it becomes banished to the unconscious mind, where it starts pulling our strings behind the curtain. And so over time, that energy develops its own characteristics, its own personality, a way of predictably responding to certain things in your environment and to other people and situations. And so the inner child becomes a part, or we might say a subpersonality, that you need to acknowledge and to care for and to integrate if you want to be increasingly aware of what compels you to say and do the things that you do. And so in this segment here today, we're going to explore a few questions to help you evaluate your inner child and how it may be impacting your experience. And we're also going to explore some of the reasons why you might struggle to connect with that inner child through the framework of internal family systems theory. And so by the end of this segment, you're going to have a better understanding of the concept of the wounded inner child and how that can be impacting your life in ways you may not even realize. We're going to learn how to evaluate how active the inner child may be based on questions that explore the underlying unconscious motivations that you might have. We're going to develop some self-compassion and understanding for why you may be struggling to connect with your inner child. And we're going to do a creative arts therapies experiential to help connect you with your parts. So the goal here is not to get rid of your inner child, but to build a healthier relationship to it through understanding and compassion and acknowledgement, right? So by connecting to our inner child in this way, we're going to start to make positive changes. They're going to help you feel a deeper sense of wholeness and fulfillment in your life. Okay. Now, if you are new to my channel, my name is brianamacwilliam, and I'm a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist, also certified in trauma-informed somatic therapy, EFT tapping, and Reiki healing. And I help adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can attract and cultivate the soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And I do this using my psycho-spiritual approach called the MacWilliam Method. And so if you enjoy the topics that we're going to be exploring today, I would encourage you to subscribe, like this video, follow me for more so that you don't miss out on future topics like this. Now, let's just dive in to our topics for today. Now, you may be wondering, well, what is the inner child? So for detailed information on this definition and exploration, I would invite you to check out the first video in this series. It's called Attachment Styles in the Inner Child in Relationships, and you can find this on my YouTube channel. But for now, let's just say that the inner child is a part of you that needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be cared for if you want to be increasingly aware of what is compelling you behind the scenes and why you do the things that you do. Right? So I wanted to share a few questions here, evaluative questions to ask yourself so that you can determine how identified you might be with the wounded inner child in your life and maybe not realize it. So the first segment has to do with basic needs, first segment of questions. So do you find it hard to decide if you're tired, hungry, anxious, or tired? Do you dislike being touched and force yourself to participate in physical affection or things like sex? Do you experience a lot of tension around sexual release and you just have to have it or you're going to explode? Do you feel ashamed or angry and lose control? Do you hate unpleasant feelings and would rather default to anger in order to feel powerful rather than helpless or out of control? When you feel helpless and out of control, do you default to blame or victimhood to gain acknowledgement or sympathy? Okay, so these would be more like basic need categories. The next one we're going to talk about is social engagement. So, do you tend towards distrusting yourself and others, including your partners? Do you find yourself drawn to partners that have addictive tendencies or that generally need to be rescued? Do you find yourself drawn to partners that are overly doting and want to rescue you? Are you sensitive to power dynamics and tend to rebel against authority? Are you sensitive to power dynamics and tend to contort yourself to remain anonymous or unseen? Are you afraid of being scapegoated and generally suspicious of kind people? Do you tend to default to someone else's opinions above your own? So this would have to do with social engagement. Now, the next one we're going to take a look at is identity development. Do new situations or activities stimulate a fear of anxiety or fear or anxiety? Does conflict make you feel more excited and alive, even if uncomfortable? Does conflict make you feel terrified and so you shrink away in fear? Deep down, do you sometimes feel like there has to be something wrong with me? Okay. Do you tend to identify with material things or objects, including overspending, shopping a lot, or hoarding things to define your value and worth? Do you struggle with transitions, saying goodbye, ending things, or just generally letting go? So these would be some things that might point towards an inner child being present in the way that our identity has developed, right? So if any of these have sounded familiar, please just let me know in the comments which ones pop up in your experience. And if you see yourself in these questions, then there may be an inner child in operation. So the next topic I want to address is a question that I often receive, which is, well, why can't I connect with my inner child? So many adults struggle to love their inner child because or to connect with it because of the emotional neglect that they experienced as children. And so as a result, they don't know where to begin because they don't have any models for it. So it can be hard to connect with your inner child even if you want to. So what does this look like in practice? Well, in my practice, clients might fall asleep when they're trying to do a guided visualization to connect to the inner child, or maybe their eyes are constantly popping open and they need to use the bathroom repeatedly. Or maybe they sit down to do a journal entry to talk to the inner child in an imaginative way, but then they're just assaulted by a cyclical string of negative thoughts and a pessimistic attitude. Oh, this is so stupid. Why should I even bother? Right? Or maybe they try hard to do an art activity similar to the one we're going to do today because they want to playfully approach the inner child, but suddenly there's this shortness of breath, sweaty palms, their heart is racing, and there doesn't really seem to be a reason for it. Or maybe they are able to engage with these activities, but what they discover is that the inner child doesn't want to talk to them. Okay. So, what do you do if that happens? And if that's ever, any of these things have occurred to you, just let me know in the comments there. Now, for these folks, internal family systems theory can provide some insight and answers. So, one of the main tenets of internal family systems theory is that we are all made up of different parts or subpersonalities. And this is not the same as dissociative identity disorder, which is when you have multiple primary personalities. Instead, this is just one personality with various contributing voices. So, these parts can be thought of as like mini versions of ourselves that exist at different developmental stages, and they have different functions. So in IFS, internal family systems theory, parts are basically divided into two categories, and that is protectors and exiles. So your wounded inner child would be considered an exile. It's a part of yourself that has literally been exiled from your conscious awareness. Now, then we have our protectors, and these are broken up into two categories. There are managers and firefighters. So a manager is put in charge of keeping that exile tucked away. And this is the part of yourself that usually expresses itself similar to an inner critic, right? It usually exerts its power by trying to take control. Then we have a firefighter. And the firefighter does just what it sounds like. It puts out fires when that exiled inner child occasionally escapes a manager. And so a firefighter operates by distancing, dousing, or distracting you from whatever the inner child is feeling. So, for example, when Tim's partner expresses an unmet need in the relationship, his immediate response is to feel anxiety because he thinks it must mean that he's a burden to them. So then the manager kicks in and tries to reduce feelings of anxiety by convincing Tim that the only solution is to take space from this partner. But when the solution makes the problem worse, Tim's partner breaks up with him, and the inner child escapes the manager and feels tremendous shame, guilt, or defeat. So then a firefighter jumps into action and says, hey, we don't need to feel these bad feelings. Instead, why don't we just go drinking with our buddies and spend the afternoon swiping right on Tinder? And so the best way to get over somebody is to get under somebody else, right? And so the uncomfortable feelings that the inner child stimulates in this instance become dismissed, numbed out, ignored. In other words, it's pushed back down, unable to really express itself until perhaps Tim meets somebody new and that inner child starts pulling the strings behind the curtain again, hoping that this time Tim will listen and maybe learn a different way to process those feelings when they come up again, so that the child can become better integrated into his mental and emotional maturity. Basically, in order to heal our wounded inner child, we have to understand how these different parts of ourselves function and interact with each other. And so if you're having difficulty connecting to that inner child directly, it may be that you need to speak to a manager or a protecting part first. Okay. And so this is where we're going to get to the meat of our presentation here for today. We're going to do an art activity to help recognize your managers. Okay. So I invite you to just grab something to write and to draw with. If you have just a scrap piece of paper will do, as long as you have something to write with. And there's basically 4 steps to this. So what I want you to do, number 1, is I want you to write down what you don't like in relationships, right? And you can even type it in the comments there or in the chat, however you're watching this live stream. So I'm just going to write it here, make sure that you can see that. What don't you like? So what don't you like in relationships? Okay, number 1, what don't you like in relationships? And the second thing, number 2, what is the opposite of that? So if you don't like whatever this is in relationships, that must mean that you like whatever the opposite of that is. So I don't like being ignored, which means I do like acknowledgement and communication. I know my handwriting isn't great, but you get the idea. And the third thing is, okay, so I know what I don't like. That must mean I do like this. Then you have to ask yourself, well, why don't you have it yet? Right? Why don't I have it yet? Now, this is where you're going to take a moment and kind of drop an inquiry down into the body. Why don't I have it yet? And just notice, what are the thoughts that come up when you ask that question? Why don't I have it yet? And so usually there will be a laundry list of reasons that pop up in your mind. And it's typically a manager that's trying to protect you, because when we think about why don't I have it yet, it's going to stimulate some feelings of angst, of loss, of longing, of maybe even heartbreak. And so the manager is going to want to protect that. So now it's going to start telling you a bunch of stories, right? So we're stimulating a manager right now. So some examples of the stories that may come up might sound like, you're too inexperienced to get that job. It requires more knowledge and skill that you have. Or it's too late to start now. Everybody else has already done it and you're never going to catch up. Or you don't have the resources to do this. It's not worth your time and effort. Or you're too messed up. You're just going to hurt anyone that loves you. Better to be alone than to hurt somebody else, right? or you're too needy and burdensome. This is the best you can do. If you don't settle now, you're just going to wind up alone, right? So these are some of the stories that will come up. And just let me know in the chat or in the comments there what your managers have to say. What stories are coming up to protect you from trying and failing, okay? And so now, next to this list of reasons that you're going to write down, we're going to draw a figure that might represent the voice, right? That might represent the character inside that is giving you this list of reasons why you don't have it yet. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a symbol. It can just be a squiggle. I'm just going to do a stick figure. Just a basic stick figure, right? And you might want to flesh this out a little bit, like consider the quality of the stories that are coming through, like the tonality of the voice that you're receiving, and what kind of lines would represent that tone. So my voice might be pretty critical. And so what kind of lines represent a critical tone or voice? So maybe it's kind of loud and sharp with zigzags. Maybe there's some arrows pointing out, not easy to approach, right? And then you might notice how does it feel in your body when you think about these things? So maybe there's like a tightness in your chest or your throat. So I'm just going to make a squiggle right here. It's like tightness in my throat and in my chest. Maybe I start to feel anxiety and that drops down into my abdomen or my stomach. So I'm going to use red to represent anxiety. And you also want to think about the colors you're using, right? What colors would express that feeling? I'm going to use gray because I think it also, these kind of things pull me out of my body and into my head. So it feels kind of, kind of gray and gloomy in my head when I think this way. Like dark clouds. And now I find myself wanting to put a little frown on the face. Okay. So this would be an example of your manager. This one's probably for me an inner critic. And of course, there could be any number of variations of what that might look and feel like for you. But we have just met one of your managers, right? And the power of creative arts approaches, in my opinion, combined with somatic awareness, is that we're externalizing that energy. We're pulling it out of the body. We're making it something that we can now converse and dialogue with. And that's going to help you differentiate when those stories come up. Is this an aspect of who I am? Is this truth of reality? Or is this just a story that one of my parts is telling me because they're trying to protect me in some way? Right? Okay. So managers, one thing I think it's important to note here is that managers usually discourage us from putting ourselves into vulnerable positions that could risk us failing or getting hurt in some way, right? So they are, even though they may come across as very mean and criticizing and hard on ourselves, it's likely that they formed to protect us from something even worse, right? And so they're going to perceive us as seeking some kind of unattainable fruit, and it's going to prevent us from going after that because it doesn't want us to feel hurt. Okay. They want to prevent us from trying and failing, because if we fail, then maybe an even deeper negative story will be proven true about ourselves. And then we're afraid of losing ourselves in the depth of that kind of heartbreak. Okay. So this would be a manager that has often assumed the role of what I might call the inner critic, but there are other managers that can be kind of tricky, and they disguise themselves as belonging to the larger whole of the self. I'm going to call this the spiritual self, right? The essence of your spirit, the whole of who you are, that bright ball of light, love, and compassion that you are in this lifetime. And so this is a part of you that has a greater perspective, like a moon's eye view of yourself and your life in its larger context and perspective, right? So we will have some managing parts that try to act like that part of us. Okay, so these managing parts are usually in operation. They're harder to spot, and they're usually in operation when we've been trying really hard to heal ourselves and to better ourselves well enough that now we think that we're finally deserving and ready for the love that we want, right? And yet nothing seems to really be changing in our experience. So, for example, when you and your managers start becoming increasingly self-aware, and this happens a lot in the self-help and personal development space, there's a spiritual self like manager who might say something like, oh, great new information. So now if I do all the self-help I can, gain all the insight possible, I'm nice to everyone, and I heal myself according to these standards of wellness, then I will finally be worthy enough to deserve a loving partner, right? So this is a self-like manager. And the problem is that all that work that you're doing is still an energy that is fueled by an underlying sense of worthlessness. Okay. And then we arrive at a place where we feel kind of righteous and indignant because all of our efforts wind up creating the same pattern, just in different packaging. And so now entitlement and resentment sink in, and we keep feeding a defensive way of being. Only now we feel increasingly ashamed, and because being defensive, angry, or resentful is not an enlightened or secure way to be, presumably, and we should know better by now. So then we conclude that we turn it in on ourselves even more, and then we conclude that we must be doomed and unlovable. So we stop trying or putting ourselves at risk of future failure. And our insecurities now, we feel like we're regressing, and we cycle right back to where we were. And those insecurities have been very cleverly reinforced, right? And so this is, regardless of whatever, the relationship status is, we're going to feel increasingly insecure, right? And so what do we need to do in that instance? We need to differentiate these managing parts from the essence of who you are, your spiritual self, and in relationship to our inner child, or the exile, as we might put it, right? So to learn more about how do we do that and to dialogue with these parts, I invite you to just give this video a like, a comment below. Make sure that you follow for more, because I'm going to be coming back next week and we're going to explore this a little bit more in depth, right? But before you go, I'd love for you to let me know in the comments, what does your manager have to say? And how do you think that they might be protecting you based on what we've discussed here today? And so I look forward to learning more about your experience. Thank you for watching, and I hope I will see you next week. For those of you that are going to stick with me for a minute, I'm going to take a moment to see if I can answer some of the questions that have popped up in the chat. I see a few here. I'm just going to scroll a little bit. Let's see. It's hard to talk to a dismissive without feeling as though you're bothering them, no matter how assertive you are. It's okay to disagree. Just because you both don't agree doesn't mean they don't care. Sure. I have 10 managers. Oh, it's good to know. There might even it's like an onion. Sometimes we peel back the top layer and there's more there. Okay. We have some other comments over here. As soon as I've reached my inner child and I'm with her in a painful memory, what would you suggest we do with the inner child? Be my present self with the inner child, or act out as the inner child and do what she would like to do, and act out and tell the parents what she thinks? Well, those are two very interesting approaches. In my experience, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish in the session with someone. So if someone, and it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. In my work, I like to bring a guide, usually. So I tend to approach these things more from a spiritual perspective. So usually I will have the sovereign self, which is a more integrated ego, visit the child with the spiritual self. And you could also invite a guide along if you want to. And I would ask the guide that question, right? Is it best to merge with the child in this moment? Or can we act out an active imagination or a guided visualization here of inquiring, what does this child need and what would it require in order to be unburdened, right? So I tend to approach this more from a spiritual angle, but becoming the child and acting it out and allowing it to move through you is certainly one way that you can do this. If you decide to do that, I would make sure that you're creating containment for that experience, whether you know how to create that space on your own or whether you're doing that with a trained, facilitator. I hope that helps. I have something, maybe to answer this question a little more in depth. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel. It's called Hot Seat Interviews. And I think at this point, we have 4 or 5 examples of how I work this way with folks in the session and how I kind of intuitively just shift and adjust based on what it seems like the person needs. So I invite you to check out that playlist. Letting go. Oh yeah, the letting go one. I'm still questioning if what I'm experiencing is an aligned response or a grasp for something that I have brought into my awareness. Yeah, that's great, Sarah. Almost all of them. Fantastic stuff, Brianna. Can an inner child gain too much power if he or she wants to affect the lifestyle? For example, like an adult baby activities and getting into conflict with other parts. So I guess it would depend on how we're defining too much power. I'm not really sure what adult baby activities implies, or unless you're talking about like a kink or something like that. So I don't think there's any such thing as right or wrong. When we say too much power, I guess what we're maybe asking about is it has led to some kind of negative consequence in your life, or there's some aspect of however it's expressing itself that's creating a dysfunction and causing you harm in some way. So in that case, then I would want to look at, how is this serving me and how is it not serving me? And what is this part really asking of me, right? I might also argue, like, if we are talking about this in the context of a kink, then that's probably more manager. Like, if you're doing those activities, then the manager is finding a way for you to sublimate what the child is needing. But again, those forms of sublimation can create dysfunctional problems if you're experiencing them as creating harm in your life in some way. So, for example, like sometimes we have a firefighter. Okay. So a firefighter part would, in the example that I offered, like, let's go drinking, let's swipe right on Tinder sort of mindlessly, let's just zone out and disconnect, douse, distract ourselves from what's going on so we don't have to feel the feelings, right? But our managers might be hypervigilant, right? So don't eat that tub of ice cream to soothe your feelings, because the manager says we have to be in good shape and we have to be thin and we have to be attractive to attract partners. So we have these two extreme sort of attitudes going on inside of us, and we're sort of swinging back and forth between. So now there's the shameful part. There's the part that's like, let's numb this out. And then there's the part that's like, let's clamp down and get super disciplined. And they're all arguing with each other. So now we have a heightened level of conflict because our parts are in argument with each other. So this is why I think that creating more differentiation between these parts and then choosing to align ourselves with the spiritual self, which becomes an aid to what I call the sovereign self. So the sovereign self is what I consider to be a flexible ego. A flexible concept of self. It is the part that is able to look at these different voices inside of us and be like, and notice what's going on there, ask questions about it, and take action to unburden those parts. The spiritual self, I think of as the higher self. This is the part that is connected to the large and forever unknowable aspects of you in physical form. So the sovereign self and the spiritual self work in tandem. This is not based on IFS. This is my own thoughts and approaches to things. So with that, thank you for asking those questions. And I appreciate your joining me here for our live stream. We're going to be back next week, same day and time. And we're going to be talking more about how to dialogue with these parts. So I appreciate your attendance, and I will also be following up with some comments for the replay. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.